Well, I know the calendar says it's December 27th, but as far as I'm concerned, it's still Christmas. I just don't see the need to be in such a hurry to throw the tree out on the curb, right? Can't we just sort of ease out of it slowly? We spend so much time in the build-up, even to the point of letting things get kind of crazy and hectic from time to time. So doesn't it make sense to take our time, enjoy it for a little longer, enjoy the fruits of our labor? I've mentioned before this observation of mine that the day after Christmas in America is sort of like a bunch of people waking up after having had maybe a little too much to drink the night before. They have this collective hangover. They can't quite remember what they did, but then they start to remember joy, goodwill, peace on earth. What were we thinking? What was I doing? What were we thinking? Must have been something in the eggnog, you know? Like, by the way, does anybody still drink that stuff? Okay, people like it? Okay, well, you know, the one thing I wish we could hang on to from Christmas is this idea of peace on earth. Christmas seems to be the one time a year where we actually voice the belief that such a thing might be possible, where we dare to believe that peace on earth might be a reality. And earlier, just this month, I was talking about how the world is in fact becoming a more peaceful place, despite the headlines that want us to believe that violence is everywhere and it's increasing. That's not true. Violence is decreasing. So why is it that we are so willing to believe that violence is increasing, that things are getting worse? Well, part of the problem is our track record, right? Take a look at some of these statistics. The history of humankind on planet Earth. In the last 4,000 years of recorded human history, there have been only 268 years of peace on Earth, near as they can figure. 14,351 wars that killed 3.6 billion people. In the last 300 years, there have been 286 wars in Europe alone. So, that gives you a little idea of why we tend to be pessimistic, because we don't have such a great track record. And yet, in fact, it is getting better. Peace on earth is becoming more of a reality, and we have to keep working to make it into an even greater reality, manifesting it on a much larger scale. It's hard to believe that the earth has been in such rough shape, though, over the years. It's hard to believe that we have such a violent history when you see a picture of the earth like this. I remember the first time, and it wasn't all that long ago, when they took the first picture of planet Earth from outer space. People were amazed by it because nobody had really seen what this looks like before. And it's amazing, though. You look at this and it's hard to believe that on places on that planet right now there are people who are engaged in armed conflict. They're blowing each other up. Hard to believe when you see that. From way out in space, you can't see. You can't see where one country leaves off and another begins. You don't see skin color. You can't see religion. You can't see nationality. Other than the rivers and the coastlines and maybe the occasional mountain range, there are no boundaries or divisions between us. When we see things from this perspective, we have to wonder, what on earth is there to fight over? What is there to fight over? In the grand scheme of things, and we're going to take another perspective here, let's put up the next slide. Because in the grand scheme of things, and I hope you can see that dot within that blue circle, that's planet Earth, from way, way far away. This is a very famous picture that was taken by the Voyager 1 spacecraft back, I believe, in 1990. Voyager 1 was at the very edge of our solar system. And the late, great, brilliant Carl Sagan was one of the consultants on this project. And when Voyager 1 got out to the edge of the solar system, he had this great idea. He talked to the controllers and he said, let's turn that sucker around and point the camera back at planet Earth and catch a picture of what planet Earth looks like from some 3 billion miles away out in space. And there it is, that pale blue dot that you can barely see there against the sea of black and other specks of light and stars. The pale blue dot, it's one of those stories that's found a place in our American folklore in many ways. And Carl Sagan later on had some thoughts about it because he had the opportunity to contemplate this photograph. And he shared some of his remarks during a commencement address in 1996. So we're going to be taking a few minutes here to listen to Carl Sagan tell us about what this picture, this pale blue dot, means to him. So let's watch and listen.
That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
That's what I call preaching. Now, I hear people say that science is cold and materialistic, but I have yet to hear any spiritual guru say anything that comes even close to being as powerful as what we just heard from Carl Sagan, who was a scientist and an atheist. It's an amazing message. So It's one of the most profoundly spiritual messages that I've ever heard, because it's spiritual in the sense that it transcends religious boundaries. Jesus talked about it, so did the Buddha, and so did many others who, like Carl Sagan, are pointing out the folly of our human conceits and the need to deal more kindly and compassionately with each other. That's the message. That's the worldview they're promoting. And this is a worldview that I've heard recently called deep integrity. Deep integrity. It comes from the work of Michael Dowd, who we've talked about before. He wrote this wonderful book here called Thank God for Evolution. And he believes that this worldview that Carl Sagan talked about is part of an evolutionary process. We're becoming more peaceful and less violent because, well, duh, it's adaptive, right? Less violence means we're more likely to survive. It makes perfect sense to me. And in order to make that happen, we need to be more compassionate. We need to be opening our circles of caring and compassion in the world. The very idea of peace on earth is an evolutionary process. And one of the things that makes us unique as human beings is that we can take an active role in directing this process. We can take hold of it. But there's one of these big ifs involved here. We can help direct the process if we're willing to let go of fear. That's a tough one. If we're willing to let go of fear and go with this evolutionary impulse towards compassion, peace, forgiveness, all of those things, that's the beautiful message of his book. That's the beautiful message of what Carl Sagan is teaching us and so many other spiritual teachers over the ages. There are things we can do to engage the process and help it along. We have to. In order to grow in deep integrity and promote the kind of peace on earth that this season is all about, and if we're going to continue that past this season, Michael gives us 4 core values that we need to cultivate in order to do that. Here they are. Trust, authenticity, responsibility, and service. Together those form deep integrity. So let's start out with trust. Trust has 2 other aspects that go hand in hand with it. They are humility and faith. So trust, humility, faith means that we surrender to the truth, to the vision of our divine wholeness, the wisdom of our divine wholeness. We acknowledge that there's something greater in the universe than our limited human perspective. And it's hard to look at that picture of the earth, both pictures, the one of the beautiful blue planet and then the pale blue dot. It's hard to look at that and see our place in the universe without feeling a certain sense of humility, isn't it? And yet humility is not about feeling like a worm in the dust. Now that's the approach that's been taken in many traditional religions, where they depict human beings as worthless sinners, utterly depraved, powerless to do anything good. Now, do you think that that's a message that is helpful? Do you think that maybe that attitude might be responsible just a little bit for why the world seems to be in such a mess? Think about it. What do you think happens when you try to get all the people in the world to believe that they're depraved and evil? Huh? What are they? They're not going to let you down, right? You know, you want everybody to believe they're depraved and evil. That's what you end up creating in the world, is depravity and evil. That kind of religion is the exact opposite of humility. It's actually a kind of arrogance that insists that this is the way it has to be. And it's really just a fear-based power grab. True humility, it comes from realizing and discovering and understanding that we're part of this ongoing process, that we don't have the truth, that we are discovering the truth as part of an ongoing process. We trust the process. We have faith that our understanding will grow as long as we are willing to change along with the process. When we do that, we discover our inherent power. And we have some wonderful inherent powers as human beings. We have courage as human beings, and then we learn how to use it in ways that will benefit others. Now the next step, the next element of deep integrity is authenticity, and it carries with it a couple of things like honesty and sincerity. Of course, we want to be honest in our dealing with others, right? In the book, The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz talks about being impeccable with our word. Impeccable with our word. That's a big part of it when we're talking to other people, but being authentic and honest also applies to ourselves. We have to be honest with ourselves about ourselves. You know, it's easy to talk a good game about truth and principle and things like that, but authenticity means looking at whether we are really walking the talk in our lives. Do we really believe that this is an abundant universe? Or are we just stuffing a lot of fear and anxiety over whether there's really enough to go around? Do we really believe in the indwelling Christ, or are we chasing gurus and God substitutes out there someplace who we think are going to give us the answers? How often do we even ask those questions of ourselves? They're important because those are the questions that keep us focused and keep us coherent and help us to be in integrity. The third core value, responsibility, which carries with it accountability and compassion. You know, in Unity, we say that we're not just responsible for the things that we say and do, we are also responsible for what we think. Thoughts are powerful, but that doesn't mean that everything that happens to us is the result of what we personally are thinking. Yes, there are certain things that come about that we draw to us in the sense that our own consciousness or thought process causes them, but the world is way too complex to be so simplistic as to say that everything is manifest by the power of our consciousness. There are other minds out there, right? We're not alone in this world. There are other minds out there thinking different things, and sometimes these things are going to conflict. There are other people who are taking different and conflicting actions and perspectives. There are independent causes and effects in the natural world that we have no control over, and they all work together to create the events of our lives. However, even though we're not responsible for every little thing that happens to us, we are most definitely responsible for how we react and how we respond to the things that happen to us. That's the place of power. That's where we have a choice. We may, in fact, be a victim, but that doesn't mean that we have to play the victim. Big difference. We always have a choice at some level, and we are responsible for our choices. The last of our four core values, service. Along with that, generosity and purpose. Where would we be if people didn't practice this value? The value of service. Finding ways to be of service in the world, cultivating a spirit of generosity, and having a clear sense of purpose to give us a reason for getting out of bed in the morning. At its most basic level, that's what it's all about. Why do we get out of bed in the morning? Do we have a clear sense of purpose in our lives? And if not, then that might be something to work on. And I'm thinking this is coming up on the time of making New Year's resolutions, and that might be something that's worth looking at as we go into 2016. Why do we get out of bed in the morning? What are the things that make our lives more meaningful? Okay, so those are the four core values of deep integrity, and it's kind of interesting because if you need a way to remember them, well, when we rearrange them and put them together, Michael Dowd shows us that they actually form the word STAR. Service, trust, authenticity, and responsibility. STAR. And isn't it interesting that when we look at the earth from a few billion miles away, let's see this next one. What do we see? Stars. Isn't it amazing? We see a vast field of stars. And isn't it interesting that when we think of Christmas, we sometimes think of this image, right? We think of a star, one that looks like this, hanging over a small town in the Middle East. So now when we see a star, maybe we can also think of service, trust, authenticity, and responsibility and remember that that is what it truly takes to bring about peace on earth. See you next year.